So in honor of Artemis II's successful flight to the moon and back to Earth, this is a stock recreation of the Space Launch System in Kerbal Space Program. This is not a perfect one-to-one recreation. I also added a couple of additions, such as an upper stage. It's impossible to make everything one-to-one in this game because the scale is a lot smaller, but I tried as hard as I could to essentially make the SLS first stage, and then everything else is just kind of my own addition. I wanted to keep the aesthetics, but also try to keep the performance accurate, so the KS25 engines here, based on the real-life RS25 that the SLS uses, are wickedly overpowered. So I rather limited their thrust to about 60%, and then the two boosters I limited the amount of propellant. This upper stage is based on the Centaur, which will fly on the Atlas V, and I believe it will fly on the SLS in the future. And then of course we have my little version of Orion up here, and there is a working launch escape system, so that's nice. There is a big gap between the upper stage and my version of Orion. It doesn't bother me. Some people might use fairings to cover it up. We're going to go ahead and swap out the crew here. We want Valentina. So in real life, there are 4 members. There's Commander Reed Wiseman, Pilot Victor Glover, and then the 2 mission specialists, Christina Cook and Jeremy Hansen of Canada. Now, this capsule is based on Apollo, which holds 3, so that's basically the best that we can work with. Now, we have a beautiful view of the KSC and the vehicle. We're going to go ahead and ignite the KS-25 engines, which are not powerful enough to lift the entire vehicle off the ground. But don't worry, because that's what the boosters are for. So we're going to ignite the boosters, and the entire stack is going to lift off the ground. And because those boosters are made of solid propellant, or rather has solid propellant, once they ignite, there's no stopping them, and you're flying regardless. We do have a launch escape system, so there's no real concern for crew safety. But we're going to fly vertical, and after the boosters separate, we are going to turn horizontally to build up as much horizontal velocity as we can. Before stage separation, we want to build up about 2,000 meters per second of speed. We enter maximum aerodynamic pressure here, and we throttle the engines down to about 60%, just the RS-25s. And we're going to coast through max Q, and booster separation will occur shortly after maximum aerodynamic pressure. I want to keep the engines throttled down until after booster separation, which I'm not sure if SLS does that. I think the shuttle did. But the boosters are going to carry us up, and I tried to replicate the real booster separation. So I put retro rockets near the top that will fire upon separation, and it will fly up and away from the vehicle like that. Beautiful. There's booster separation, the first major event. Oh, I thought they were going to collide. That was interesting. But now we're going to perform a gravity turn, and the engines, the RS-25s here, are going to carry us most of the way. The next major event will be tower separation, so we're going to get rid of the launch escape system because we really don't need it anymore now that the boosters are gone. That'll come up shortly. But now we're going to be flying mostly horizontal to build up as much horizontal speed. There goes the tower. Now this part of the flight really isn't that exciting because we're just turning towards the horizon, building up as much velocity as we can horizontally. We want our apoapse, our highest point, to be about 75 to 80 kilometers as we coast into Earth orbit. That's our destination up there, the moon. We'll be flying on a free return trajectory, just like the Apollo missions. Artemis II did fly on a free return trajectory. I'm not perfectly recreating the flight path. Of course, the flight path that had a highly elliptical parking orbit and then performed a burn to push them towards the moon. We're going to do the Apollo method, where we achieve low Earth orbit first, and then we'll perform our trans-lunar injection. But we're going to speed this up a little bit, unless you want to sit here and watch the engine burn for 4 minutes. But as we approach our velocity of about 2,000 meters per second, we're going to pitch down just to keep the apoapse right about where we want it. In real life, we would achieve just under orbital velocity with the first stage, and then we would ditch it and jettison it. It would re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and disintegrate, usually over the Indian Ocean, similarly to the external tank. So we approach engine cutoff and stage separation, and the upper stage, based on Centaur, is now free. The first stage has done its job, its day is done, and now it's up to the upper stage. I'm going to wait until we reach apoapse, so I'll coast, and then I'll ignite the engine and perform orbital insertion from there. In real life, this would not happen. The upper stage would go ahead and burn and then circularize afterwards. But since we're taking a bit of a different flight path, we're going to go ahead and ignite the engine here and push ourselves away from the core stage and gain enough speed to achieve a comfortable orbit around the Earth. So there we go. That's our orbital insertion burn, and now we've achieved a really good orbit. And now we simply wait for our maneuver node, and we're going to try as hard as we can to get a really good free return trajectory. But in the meantime, Now that we've achieved orbit, we're going to look up at our destination, the moon. That's where we will be going in the relatively near future. And let's go ahead and get a good look at Valentina, Bill, and Bob resting inside of their crew. The launch is over. I mean, they've achieved orbit. Of course, we do have one extra maneuver to perform. If everything goes well, we perform translunar injection, and our velocity, our trajectory will carry us the rest of the way. No additional burns will be necessary. Now, I know that Kerbin in this game is what the planet is called, but I might say Earth and Kerbin interchangeably. Now, we have to go to our maneuver node, and our goal here is to try as hard as we can to put our crew on a free return trajectory. So we want to go about 90 degrees and then tinker with it, changing the roll, pitch, yaw, speed, stuff like that. And our goal essentially is to put ourselves in a highly elliptical Earth orbit that will give us a lunar encounter whenever we are furthest away from Earth. Hopefully, we'll fly within a good distance of the moon, and once we go around the moon, it'll send us just right back to Earth. And of course, if everything goes well and we map this out, we will be on a free return trajectory, and it'll send us right back to the Earth. Of course, for Apollo and Artemis, everything is meticulously planned out in advance. They know exactly what to do, when to do it. I don't, so I'm tinkering with it, but eventually I got myself into a very comfortable free return trajectory. I cut out like the 20 minutes of me tinkering with it. But in the meantime, as I mentioned, we get to see these really beautiful views of the Earth and the light going through the atmosphere. Really, really beautiful stuff. So while we're busy orbiting the Earth, let's go ahead and take a look at what the moon would look like, or mun, it's sometimes called in this game. But look at that, we get a great view of the moon. Over the next couple of days or so in-game, it'll be getting closer and closer, and the Earth will be getting further and further away. But now it is time for perhaps the most critical part of the mission, trans-lunar injection. We're going to burn the engine at the right time, at the right angle, and that's going to propel us to the moon, assuming everything goes well. So as you see here, I have my maneuver mode set up, and assuming that we follow this trajectory, this will take us on a comfortable free return. We'll pass within a certain distance of the moon, and we'll go around. I think we approach the moon within about 50 kilometers, or about 50,000 meters. And we're going to go ahead and prepare the engine here. In real life, this stuff would be automated. The flight computer would do it. The crew wouldn't have to worry too much about it. But as we approach our maneuver node, the engine is ignited and the TLI burn has officially started. I'm pretty bad at doing like maneuvers in this game. It's not necessarily my expertise. I can do simple encounters, no problem. But as you see here, our orbital trajectory, the blue line you see, that's our true trajectory. We want to burn this engine, as I mentioned earlier, at the right speed, at the right angle, at the right time, or rather to get to the right speed, so we can go around the moon and head back to Earth. So let me slow it down a little bit. Right about there, that looks about good. So look at that. We'll be within about 35 kilometers of the Earth's surface, which is good because that'll bring us into the upper atmosphere, and that's very, very important. And we'll be passing within about 50 kilometers of the moon. So that's a pretty good free return trajectory right there. So assuming that no additional burns are performed, we will head around the moon and then come right back towards the Earth. So that's very, very nice. That's exactly what you'd like. I'm going to make a couple of quick saves along the way just to make sure. And look at that. We got our destination right there. The moon is visible. But I'm going to make a couple of quick saves just to ensure that I don't mess things up too much, because in Kerbal Space Program, it's very easy to do that when you're running everything manually. But that's our free return trajectory. So that's roughly how close we'll get to the moon. But look at that. It's pretty decent. I mean, that's a great free return trajectory. Of course, you can tinker with it, but I'm satisfied with it now. So this is what we'll run with. So let's go ahead and take a look at our spacecraft in orbit as we prepare to exit low Earth orbit. Let's get a view of the crew. So this is from Valentina's POV. There's Bill and Bob, and we get to see the Earth's horizon out of the window. And let's see if we can turn over and see the moon from the crew capsule. Oh, look at that. There's the moon right there. How beautiful. Let's go and roll over the spacecraft. There's the moon. We get a pretty nice little view of it right there. Oh, let's not roll it too much. There's the moon right out of the window. Very nice. And then here's the Earth, and we see the horizon. Now, over the next couple of days, the moon is going to get bigger and bigger, and this Earth will get smaller and smaller as we begin heading closer to the moon and further from the Earth. We're going to go ahead and extend our solar panels and our communication satellite. This is just so we can look a little bit more professional, so it looks like we know what we're doing, you know? And once we head a certain distance away from the Earth, we're going to go ahead and jettison the upper stage. We don't need it anymore. Theoretically, with this upper stage, we do have enough fuel to orbit the moon, and we probably could start a descent with it. The problem is that we do not have any landing legs on our capsule, but theoretically, we would be able to land on the moon and even return. But as I mentioned, we're going to replicate the Artemis II flight profile. So now we are preparing to jettison the upper stage. One thing I noticed is that we sort of have a bit of an issue with the ejection of the capsule. It pushed us a little bit further, so it moved a bit faster, and it knocked us a little bit off of our flight path. And I had to perform a secondary adjustment burn, maybe like a course correction, to just make sure that we were heading back on our original free return trajectory. So when I ejected the upper stage, or I jettisoned basically my version of Centaur, we actually got pushed further out. And you'll see that I'm entering the atmosphere at a very low altitude, or at least that's what our periaps is. And that's not a good idea because we might be entering the atmosphere too fast, too steep, which would not necessarily be good for the crew. So I had to make a little tiny adjustment burn just to make sure that we were heading on a proper free return trajectory. That brought us within about 35 kilometers of the Earth and about 50 kilometers of the moon, which, as I mentioned, that's a pretty comfortable free return trajectory. Of course, Artemis II in real life flew about 4,000 miles from the moon, which is about 6,400 kilometers. But now, as we enter our big coasting phase, the lunar surface, or the moon, is going to get bigger and bigger from our window as we grow closer to it. And the Earth is going to get further and further out of the window, making it appear smaller and smaller. Eventually, it's going to get to the point where the moon is bigger out of their window than the Earth is. I believe it was stated that at closest approach, it would basically be the equivalent of holding a basketball at arm's length away from your face. That's how close I would get to the moon. But I can't imagine what it must have been to see the Earth getting smaller from the window with each passing minute. Of course, the Apollo astronauts got to see this wonderful sight, and they got to see the entire planet from out of their window. I couldn't imagine how cool that must have been to see not only the Earth getting smaller, but the moon growing closer and appearing to be bigger out of the window. But externally, when we see the spacecraft as it is, we can physically see the Earth getting smaller and the moon getting bigger. You might notice I'm also saying Earth instead of Kerbin. I use the terms interchangeably. I believe that this game is like 1/10 the scale, or about 10% of the scale of the real solar system, so it's a little bit easier in this game. But look at this really stunning view right here. We're going to be approaching the moon, I believe, from the opposite angle that Artemis II did. But regardless, that's how close we're going to get to the moon. And once we go around, we're going to head to a trajectory that's going to bring us right back to Earth without any additional burns necessary. So that's what's going to happen. That big yellow line is where we will be going once we move away from the moon. So now we're going to be getting closer and closer, and from out of the window, they're going to be able to take some really stunning photographs and video. They have an iPhone 17 aboard, like one of the fancier ones, and then they have like a very professional, like Nikon camera. So they're going to be taking some pretty spectacular pictures. And one of the best things about modern technology is it's very portable, it's easily accessible. So an iPhone is a lot easier to take on board than like a huge professional camera. And Apollo did not have these, obviously, because it was the late 60s, early 70s. Cell phones hadn't really been thought about just yet. So we're going to see some pretty stunning videos. And I imagine the crew probably took thousands of pictures. I don't know about videos, but they definitely took thousands of pictures. And I'm sure one of the higher-ups at NASA or whoever is going to go through each of them individually and sort of handpick which ones. But I imagine everything will be uploaded eventually. They want the nicer ones first, and then they'll upload the scrap ones a little bit later. So let's take a look out of the window here and see what the crew would see of the moon. Let's switch over to the other side. We got to go find the moon. There it is. But look at that. From this angle, they can very clearly see all the craters, the hills, the valleys, the crevices, the divots. They'll be able to see everything. And they're going to get some pretty stunning views. And they're going to be able to see how the sun's light casts shadows into the craters, and they're going to see some pretty spectacular stuff. So we're going to be spending a good bit of time here doing our lunar flyby. Valentina seems to be quite thrilled at what she's seeing right now. I imagine Bill and Bob are most likely the same, but she's pretty thrilled to see this, as I'm sure all of us were. So moving further along in our flight path, we're going to be able to witness not only the sun, but also the Earth disappearing from view behind the moon. And we get to zoom in and see all these really incredible lunar surface details. Our closest approach would be about 51 kilometers, and we're going to be performing our closest approach behind, like, the dark side of the moon. Well, technically, we're in front of the moon right now, I guess. But we will be able to see the sun and the Earth disappear behind the moon. We won't be able to see very much from up close because, as I mentioned, this is the far side of the moon. So, but look at that. The sun gets to disappear, and now we get to witness the Earth doing exactly the same thing. And I imagine they're going to have some beautiful videos and photos of Earth set and probably Earth rise. I'm not sure they're going to be able to take many good things of the sun because it's going to be too bright. The camera might not pick it up very well. But as we approach the other side and we zoom in and see some really close-up lunar details, we're going to be able to see Earth rise, similarly to the Apollo astronauts. And this time, they'll know exactly when it happens, which the Apollo astronauts did not. They didn't know when it was going to happen. It kind of caught the crew off guard. But look at that. We get to see the beautiful view of the Earth appearing from behind the moon. And now we're going to be flying away from the moon, and the moon's going to be getting further and further. And then as the days go on, we're going to be getting closer and closer to the Earth. Now, Artemis II did not orbit the moon. They just simply performed a lunar flyby. This is technically the second crewed lunar flyby. The first time was Apollo 13. Of course, the lunar landing was aborted due to a spacecraft issue. That's a whole story in and of itself. But Artemis II is performing a lunar flyby simply as a demonstration of the Orion spacecraft and also of the other systems on board as well. They're using a bit of an understated version of the Space Launch System, so they're not using the big fancy block tubing that they would like to use. But we get to see the entire moon from the window, and now it's getting further and further away, and we're going to begin preparing for re-entry over the next couple of days. But look at that. We get to see our last few views of the moon, and now we're going to be getting closer and closer and closer to the Earth. The moon moving along its orbital path of the Earth is going to get further away. We're going to have to bid farewell to our beautiful, beloved moon, and now we're going to be heading back to the Earth. Thankfully, because of the free return trajectory, no additional burns are necessary, but in real life on Apollo, they would perform a couple of course corrections just to make sure that they're heading along the right path. But we don't have to worry about that for now. And now let's get a couple of views of the Earth out of the window of our, I guess, command module. That's what we'll call it. The Earth gets closer, and let's see what it looks like from the window. Of course, we're going to get tons of beautiful pictures and videos of this. But look at that. That's really pretty. I can't imagine what that must look like in real life. Of course, the photos don't really do it justice. So now we just simply prepare for re-entry as we observe beautiful views of the Earth. This free return trajectory is going to take us relatively close to the Space Center, so we'll go basically close to where we launched from. So hopefully we'll land in this area. We'll splash down in the ocean. As I mentioned, I'm very glad that we're landing relatively close to the Space Center. It's going to make the recovery cruise a lot easier. Of course, in real life, Artemis II entered over the Pacific Ocean. They splashed down just west of the California coast near San Diego. So now, next major step is re-entry. And of course, we want to land in the ocean. That's what the spacecraft is designed to do. The Russian space missions, like Soyuz, actually lands in the Kazakh steppe. It's like a desert in Kazakhstan, formerly the Soviet Union. And they have retro rockets built into the Soyuz to cushion the impact. Well, of course, it lands on a parachute. So we jettison the service module, we ditch it, and now we prepare for re-entry. I'm going to speed things up a little bit here. During this re-entry, the service module is going to disintegrate, but the command module where the crew is will be recovered. Now, the heat shield is ablative, so it's kind of like a covering. They put like this material on the bottom, and when it becomes heated, it's going to burn off a gas that sort of creates a shield. It's an ablative heat shield around the capsule, which helps to protect the crew and the spacecraft. Now, we want to enter the Earth's atmosphere at a very precise angle. We want to stay in the upper atmosphere for as long as we can. Every time we're in the atmosphere, or every second, we're going to slow down due to heating, drag, and air resistance. And our goal is to stay in the atmosphere long enough to the point where we can lose enough speed to safely descend and use our parachutes to land. If we enter too steep, we'll burn up and disintegrate most likely. And if we do make it through, the parachutes won't work because we're moving so fast. Too shallow and we don't lose enough speed, we'll actually exit the atmosphere and orbit the Earth. So it's a very precise angle. They did this with Apollo. They're doing this with Artemis. But of course, we stay in the atmosphere just long enough to keep descending, so we can lose enough speed to use our parachutes. And now the drag chutes successfully deploy. We jettison the heat shield, which the heat shield's a separate part in this game. In real life, they would not do that because it's like a coating that they put at the bottom of the capsule. And now we activate the main chutes, and the crew is now safely descending. We've made it through re-entry, and now the parachutes are going to carry us the rest of the way, and we have a successful splashdown. The crew is now back home, safe. And at this point, they would have like a balloon that would deploy near the top of Artemis, kind of like a buoy, just to keep the spacecraft upright, similarly to what Apollo did. And now we go through the necessary recovery operations, and we wait for somebody to pull us out of this capsule and bring us home. In real life, Artemis II entered over the Pacific and splashed down just outside of the California coast, I believe west of San Diego. And of course, they were successfully recovered, and the crew is now home and safe after their wonderful, wonderful mission. So let's go ahead and recover the crew and call Artemis II, or at least the KSP rendition, a success.